If you've ever seen me turn a Starbucks drive-thru order into a casual conversation that ends with me promoting my YouTube channel and original music, you know that I am a master of conversational manipulation. You can do the same thing musically with chord progressions. So today we're just going to go over a few different kind of tips and tricks that you can use that go beyond just dominant 7 chords to just push a chord progression in a certain way. But first, let's kind of recap the harmonic function of a dominant 7 chord, if you will. We're going to do this in the key of 2020, the key of D, D major, right? And we're just going to play some other chords in the key of D, like maybe like a D major to G, B minor, D, G, A7, and hitting that A dominant 7 is just going to hang there. It's just going to make you do it. You have no choice. You think you have free will, but you don't. It's all a simulation, and you end on a D major chord, right? That A7, its function as a dominant 7 chord pushes it back home to the 1 chord, okay? So this is called a 5 to a 1. Essentially, all that means is like, you know, there's 7 notes in the major scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, then 1 again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 5th note, its chord is going to be a dominant 7 chord that is going to really kind of push it home, right? So there's a really easy way to kind of see this on a guitar. If we have our home key on the A string, so like the 5th fret on the A string is a D, its 5th is always going to be the string below it, okay? Now, guitar is an instrument of kind of root notes, essentially, as far as like where you form a chord voicing. So I think it's really important to know that stuff like that, having a chord and then making a dominant 7 chord will always bring you back home no matter where you are. And you can actually be outside of the key. It doesn't always have to be a 5 to 1, which we're going to use a real world example in just a second. But let's quickly just go over these chord voicings, right? So I'm doing an A string rooted bar chord. So it's like the 5th fret of the A string and then 7, 7, 7, D, G, B. You don't even have to do the whole bar chord. You can just play here. But I'm thinking of a root note here, and then lowering it 1. Make it a dominant 7, A7, just like that. Where, again, I'm barring the 5th fret, ring finger's on the 7th fret of the A string, middle finger is on the 6th fret of the G string, and I open up the D string. Again. You can do it just like that. A much easier way to do that in open position would be to take a D major chord. Play this A7, an A major with the G string open up. Okay, now what I think is an underutilized chord would be a 9 chord. Maybe in this case, right? A is our 5th, D, E, F sharp, G, A. So A is the 5th note. So A is whatever chord you put on A, it's going to have some kind of push to get you back home to D major, right? But even easier than an A7 chord, where I'm just holding the 2nd fret of the D string, the 2nd fret of the B string down. Even easier than that, I can just do this. Okay? I just hit an open A, open G, B, and E. And again, that's really the sound of a 9 chord, A9, essentially, back home to D. Okay? So that's a much even easier way to get from D to somewhere else and back home, right? Now let's do this in a different key where the open strings aren't necessarily helping us out as much, okay? Let's actually, let's do it in the key of G. Again, we can still use open strings in the key of G. By the way, rocking the Fender Ultra Strat, by the way. Texas T, in case you're interested. Link is in the description. But one chord that I really like is this right here. Okay, I'm just holding the 5th fret of the G, B, and E strings down, and then having that open D string, right? Right there. Now we can do this exact same chord without the aid of open strings, like I was saying before, just grabbing the root note here, the 5th fret. Okay, so now I've got 5A. I'm skipping the D string, we're gonna talk about this in a second. And then going 5, 5, 5 all the way down. And I'm playing it finger style where I'm not even hitting the D string. Now, if you were to maybe name this chord, you would see this as being an A minor, okay? Right? These notes right here. On top, I have A. This is an E, and this is a C. Those 3 notes make up an A minor chord over a D bass note. Okay, so if you're just to like punch this chord voicing into like a chord identifier or something, it might be like A minor slash D. But really, the chord voicing that I think is maybe more commonly used for this is this right here, this D9 chord where I've got 5A, 4D, and then 5 the rest of the way. Okay, I think this is a really pretty chord voicing, specifically on a guitar, right? And where is this going to resolve? Home to G. Okay, so this is like a replacement for maybe a 5 chord, which I think is a little different than D7. There's something about dominant 7 chords to me that I almost think they're overused, especially the traditional chord voicings of dominant 7 chords on a guitar. Like basically in any kind of open G type thing, we always have this D7 back home. But there's so many other options, like that one right there. They kind of have a different feel to it, right? And I think one interesting way to think about this is that when it comes to any kind of extended chords and how they might have a push or a pull in a certain direction on a chord progression, we're really looking at triads nested within each other. So what I mean by that is, like we just said here, the 5th fret, highest 3 strings, that's just an A minor, right? Okay? And then we can add a D beneath it. We could add D's major 3rd. So really, you can see like a D dominant 9 chord as being a D major chord, right? D, F sharp, A. And then remember, that's a triad, a 3-note chord, a D major chord, plus an A minor chord, ACE, right? So it's kind of like those 2 triads combined. I think that's what's interesting about maybe seeing guitar shapes and arpeggios and kind of how pieces of chords are built and made, to kind of see these triads nested inside of each other. And I think you might have a better understanding of how these extended chords are made, right? So I don't want to get too far into just going through all the notes in every chord and stuff like that. But I do want to give a real-world example of what I think is like really a masterful and very creative way of just using the same idea of going from a 5 to a 1, but going through one single chord progression that is technically leaving the key sometimes, but it sounds really good. Okay, so it's going to sound like this. One more time. Okay, so this is really essentially the chord progression from Norah Jones' song called Don't Know Why. And I believe it's written by a guy named Jesse Harris. Really kind of a masterful way in talking about, of just showcasing what I'm trying to talk about generally. So again, just to breeze through the chords, if we want to think about it, we have 4 pairs of chords, okay? The first one is B flat, major 7, to a B flat, dominant 7. And I'm going to go through all these again. Then we have E flat to like a D augmented. So we're halfway done. The next pair, G minor to C9, and then the last pair, F to B flat. Okay, so it's much easier, instead of remembering 8 chords in a row, to group 4 pairs. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? And each one of those pairs leads really nicely into the next one. And I think this is just a great example of different solutions you can have that aren't always going to sound the same. The nice thing is we start this B flat major 7. So here's my root note. There's the B flat on the low E string. I've got the major 7 with my ring finger, 7th fret on the D string, pinky, 7th fret on the G string, middle finger, 6th fret on the B string. Okay? So this tells me we're in the key of B flat. I would venture to guess, right? Major 7 chord. But the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to flatten that 7th note and make it a B flat dominant 7, okay? So we talked about before, usually when you see a dominant 7 chord, that means this is the 5 chord and you're moving to its 1 chord, all right? Just like we talked about before, when your 5 chord is on the low E string, you can always find the 1 chord just by going down a string, right? So if the 6th fret on the A string, this is an E flat. If this is 1, B flat is its 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 5th below low, right? A really important thing to know that'll really help you kind of memorize chord progressions a lot easier. So B flat, major 7, to B flat, dominant 7. Where's that dominant 7 chord going to lead you? It's going to lead you home, according to where it is, to the 1 chord, which we're going to now make that a major 7 chord. All right? And then we're going to take this to a D augmented chord. All right? Really kind of an interesting way, and really another way to lend yourself somewhere. I think one of the best uses of an augmented chord is to use it as a replacement for the 5 chord. Right? We can easily, here, I'll skip ahead. So this chord, spoiler alert, D is the root note. What is D the 5th of? If you're on the A string, it's going to be just kind of like a backwards power chord, 5 to 1. So you go a string lower, 2 frets back. So D is the 5th of G, which is exactly where we're going. Doesn't always have to be major though, it can be minor. Okay, so D augmented is the 5th of G minor. Okay, it's leading us to here. Alright, so major 7, dominant 7, that leads us to 1 here. And then we're going to use this as an opportunity to force our way to G minor. And then to C9, okay? So, that D augmented chord easily could have been another dominant 7 chord, right? It totally works, right? Because we're still kind of using the, I guess, the intention of what that spot was meant to do, just take us to the G minor as a 5 to a 1. But there's a couple different variations you could do it. Dominant 7, augmented, moving on. Now we're at this pair. Again, great. We got the G minor, which is really just the 3rd fret, E, D, G, and B. Now we can go back to that chord voicing I talked about at the top of the video. C, 3rd fret on the A string. And then I'm just kind of, you can get the 2nd fret on the D string if you want. This is a C9. Or essentially, just that G minor over C. We're using the C9 chord as a way to get from where? From this to here. Remember, when this is 5, this is 1. F, back, home. Eventually, we always make it back home, right? To, like I said, where we started, in the key of B flat. So we're going back from an F to a B flat major, which, again, what's F? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It is a 5th of B flat. So this is a great way of looking at intervals and how, the 5 chord is always going to have some pull back to the 1 chord, but the type of pull it has is very dependent on which chord voicing you choose to use there. And I think this is like a fantastic example of the sound of a dominant 7 chord to a 1, or the sound of a augmented chord back home, or the sound of a 9 chord home, or just the sound of a regular 5 to 1, right? So there's a lot of stuff that you can learn by dissecting songs that you like and kind of see how maybe your taste is always going to be manipulated behind the scenes by the music that you like to listen to, right? I was a big fan of the song before I even really played guitar, and I think one of the reasons was I really liked the sound of those changes. So, those changes are something that I kind of incorporated into my playing eventually once I kind of put the name to it. It's like, oh, that's where those augmented chords, if you ever see a D with the plus sign just means augmented. It's like, oh, there's a cool use for augmented where maybe I wouldn't have known, and maybe like a popular example, because you don't see augmented chords a whole lot. And you don't see 9 chords a whole lot either, even though you should, in kind of the music that I guess generally I listen to. Again, if you're listening to old standards and jazz stuff, you come across augmented chords and 9 chords all the time. But I definitely think that you can use them really tastefully, and it'll really supplement your playing no matter what kind of genre you feel like you are. So it's just really kind of important stuff that you definitely need to know if you want to be able to push a chord progression in a certain direction. So I teach this whole song over on my Patreon, where I have a ton of song lessons and a complete beginner to intermediate course. So I'll link that below. Definitely check that out, and I'm always kind of taking requests over there too, if you're fancy. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions in the comment section, Instagram, Twitter, or the website, and I'll talk to you all soon. Thanks a lot.